In the heart of bustling Manhattan, beneath the gleaming lights of towering skyscrapers, stood Carter Enterprises, an iconic beacon of innovation, wealth, and integrity. It was a monument to the American dream, built brick by brick from nothing but sheer determination by one remarkable man, Henry Carter. But tonight, the celebrated founder of this vast empire found himself not gazing proudly from the executive suite as he once did, but staring down humbly at the polished marble floors he was now tasked with cleaning. This was Henry Carter, but here, tonight, he was Joseph Brown, a janitor working in quiet anonymity. The contrast between his current disguise and his once illustrious role could not have been sharper. Henry felt an unfamiliar ache deep in his chest, a painful tug of humility and disbelief as he pushed the cleaning cart down the deserted corridors of the company he built from scratch 40 years ago. Every polished desk, every expansive office he passed told the story of sleepless nights, immense sacrifice, and relentless ambition. Yet here he was, invisible, ignored, and forgotten by those who now held power within these walls. His heart sank further as he remembered his son, Jonathan, the brilliant young CEO, now at the helm of Carter Enterprises. Jonathan was Henry's greatest pride, handpicked to preserve not just the company's success, but its soul, its core values of respect, fairness, and dignity for every single person employed, no matter their rank. Henry had entrusted Jonathan with everything he had worked for, confident that his son shared the same uncompromising principles. But lately, unsettling rumors had reached Henry, whispers from former colleagues who spoke in hushed tones of arrogance and mistreatment within the company. Unable to rest, Henry had decided on a desperate, almost reckless plan, to witness the truth firsthand. Tonight, disguised as Joseph Brown, he was determined to discover whether the culture he had painstakingly cultivated remained intact or had eroded beneath the glittering surface of corporate success. As Henry navigated the darkened halls, he was suddenly jolted by the sharp, condescending voice of Franklin Monroe, the company's young and fiercely ambitious operations director. Franklin was notorious for his cold efficiency, but Henry had never imagined just how ruthless he could be. Without warning, Franklin deliberately knocked a cup of coffee onto the pristine floor Henry had just meticulously cleaned, smirking cruelly as the hot liquid splashed everywhere. "Clean it again, old man," he sneered. "Maybe next time you'll remember your place." A sharp sting of humiliation pierced Henry's heart. The depth of disrespect was shocking, brutal even. He lowered his gaze, silently absorbing the insult, carefully maintaining his disguise. As Franklin walked away, chuckling with Isabella Grant, the icy marketing director, Henry realized something devastating. The company he had loved, the culture he had built, was being dismantled from within, piece by painful piece. Henry's mind raced with unanswered questions, a swirl of confusion and sorrow. How had Jonathan allowed this to happen? Was his son unaware, or worse, complicit in the degradation of their values? These thoughts tortured Henry as he quietly resumed cleaning the mess left intentionally for him, each stroke of the mop deepening his sense of betrayal and urgency. Later that night, alone in the executive conference room, Henry paused to catch his breath, gazing out the window at the sparkling city lights below. A painful realization gripped him. This undercover operation wasn't just a test of the employee's integrity. It was becoming a painful test of his own heart, his beliefs, and even the trust he placed in his beloved son. Standing there, vulnerable in the silent darkness, Henry felt the heavy burden of truth pressing on him. What he was uncovering wasn't merely about poor employee treatment. It hinted at a deeper, uglier reality lurking beneath the prestigious Carter Enterprises brand, and he was terrified by what else he might discover. Yet despite the anguish, Henry knew he had no choice but to continue. His love for the company, for Jonathan, and for every individual who believed in their shared dream outweighed the pain he now felt. As he finally turned to leave, gripping his mop tightly, determination replaced despair. Henry Carter had built an empire from nothing, faced down countless obstacles, and overcome impossible odds. Now, faced with perhaps his most personal and profound challenge yet, he knew he couldn't turn away. The truth, no matter how harsh, needed to be faced head-on. Walking slowly back down the corridor, his resolve strengthened. He would expose the corruption, restore dignity to his employees, and reclaim the very soul of Carter Enterprises. And if necessary, he would confront Jonathan himself, ready to risk even their bond to protect the integrity he had dedicated his life to building. Unbeknownst to anyone else, a quiet war had begun. A battle for the heart and soul of an empire. Henry Carter, disguised as Joseph Brown, was now deep within enemy territory, prepared to face whatever darkness awaited him. But what he didn't yet know was how deeply this journey would test not just his courage, but everything he believed about loyalty, family, and justice. Tonight was just the beginning. And he would not stop until the truth came to light, no matter the cost. Each night at Carter Enterprises revealed another layer of unsettling truth, a gradual erosion of Henry Carter's carefully built legacy. Under the humble guise of Joseph Brown, Henry had immersed himself deeply into a role that provided him unsettling clarity, an intimate window into the hidden corners of the empire he once proudly commanded. The corridors that had once echoed with a sense of community and mutual respect were now silent witnesses to quiet cruelties, whispered disdain, and troubling arrogance. It was not merely the personal humiliations he endured, but the broader, systematic disregard for others that troubled him deeply. He saw younger employees, once vibrant and hopeful, now rushing nervously past him in the corridors, avoiding eye contact as though acknowledging his presence might expose them to the same humiliation he endured. The oppressive atmosphere was tangible, and it saddened Henry profoundly to see the hopeful spirit he had nurtured replaced by a culture rooted in intimidation and fear. But amidst the unsettling patterns, two individuals stood out in stark and troubling clarity: Franklin Monroe, the operations director, and Isabella Grant, the marketing director. Franklin was ambitious to the point of ruthlessness, his sharp features frequently twisted into expressions of open contempt whenever Henry crossed his path. Isabella, on the other hand, exhibited a subtler yet equally destructive form of arrogance, her aloof superiority palpable, as she quietly observed the degrading exchanges, never intervening. One night, Henry was quietly mopping the hallway near Franklin's office when he overheard the operations director in hushed conversation with Isabella. Their voices carried just enough through the thin walls to catch Henry's attention. Franklin's tone was unmistakably harsh, his words sharp-edged as he complained bitterly about the inefficiency and incompetence of the lower-level staff, dismissing their worth in disturbingly cold terms. Isabella's calm laughter in response, soft yet chilling, was even more unsettling, amplifying the cruelty of Franklin's sentiments. It was clear their disdain was not confined to him alone, but extended broadly to every person they considered beneath them. As Henry continued his duties, every interaction seemed designed to test his endurance. Franklin, sensing vulnerability, took cruel pleasure in inventing trivial tasks that kept Henry busy far longer than necessary. He would drop documents carelessly in Henry's path, forcing him to pick them up repeatedly, mocking him for his slowness. Isabella would spill coffee deliberately on a freshly cleaned table and watch indifferently as Henry cleaned it again, her eyes filled with detached amusement. Through it all, Henry maintained his composure, though his heart silently broke each night he walked away from these deliberate humiliations. He struggled internally, torn between stepping out of his disguise and confronting the perpetrators directly, or continuing to endure quietly to gather more evidence. Yet he understood that patience was critical. Reacting prematurely would not address the systemic problem he had discovered. He needed irrefutable proof to make meaningful changes. In quieter moments, during brief respites alone in empty conference rooms, Henry would sit quietly, deeply troubled by the emotional toll this undercover mission was taking on him. Memories of better days haunted him. He remembered warmly greeting every employee by name, their smiles genuine and mutual respect tangible. It was the company culture he had dreamed of, one now painfully absent. In those reflective silences, the contrast between past and present filled him with overwhelming sorrow. But Henry refused to lose hope completely. His commitment to the company and its core values remained unshaken, strengthened by witnessing the injustices firsthand. He realized profoundly that what he was fighting for was bigger than his pride or personal legacy. It was the very soul of the company itself, the dignity and respect of every individual who trusted Carter Enterprises with their livelihoods. Yet the internal struggle within Henry was also about Jonathan, his beloved son, whom he had trusted implicitly to uphold these fundamental principles. How had Jonathan become blind to such blatant abuse of power under his leadership? Was Jonathan deliberately ignoring it, overwhelmed, or simply unaware? The painful uncertainty was beginning to wear on Henry, compelling him to seek answers directly from his son. But confronting Jonathan meant exposing himself, risking everything he had worked so carefully to achieve through this difficult, lonely quest for truth. One evening, as Henry meticulously cleaned a large meeting room after an executive gathering, he noticed an abandoned memo left on the conference table. The content was stark, chilling evidence of how deep the corruption ran. Plans for further cost-cutting at the expense of the lower-level staff, with a callous disregard for the impact on their lives. Franklin's initials were at the bottom, approved casually by Isabella. Henry held the memo in trembling hands, deeply shaken. Here was undeniable proof of their cruelty, documented in black and white, coldly calculated decisions made without empathy or remorse. His resolve hardened instantly. Henry knew this was the critical evidence he needed to confront Jonathan openly and decisively. He understood that now was not the moment for emotional hesitation, but for strategic, careful action. This memo, coupled with his personal experiences, provided sufficient proof to bring these dark realities into the open. Yet he also knew the revelation would be explosive, potentially devastating to Jonathan. It was a risk Henry had no choice but to accept, driven by the greater responsibility he felt toward justice and the hundreds of employees depending on him. That night, as Henry walked slowly toward the exit, his mind was a storm of powerful emotions: sadness, anger, frustration, but above all, determination. The darkness of the building seemed symbolic, heavy with secrets yet to be revealed. In his heart, Henry knew he could no longer delay the inevitable confrontation. Carter Enterprises had lost its way, but he was prepared to fight relentlessly to steer it back to its true purpose. As he stepped outside into the cool night air, the city lights of Manhattan glittered around him, beautiful yet indifferent. Henry breathed deeply, steadying himself for the challenging days ahead. He was ready, finally, to face his son, armed with painful truths and prepared for the difficult road toward redemption and justice. Unbeknownst to the employees who had overlooked him nightly, their humble janitor, Joseph Brown, was about to trigger seismic changes within their ranks. Henry Carter was returning, not as a forgotten founder, but as an unwavering champion of dignity and integrity, determined to restore the lost soul of his beloved company. The Manhattan skyline glittered distantly outside the expansive glass walls of Carter Enterprises, indifferent to the silent drama unfolding inside its prestigious offices. Henry Carter, still cloaked in the humble persona of Joseph Brown, felt each passing night deepen the chasm of sorrow within his soul. He had believed that nothing could break him, not after the countless hardships he'd conquered to build his legacy. But the deliberate humiliation, the relentless cruelty he faced night after night, pushed him toward an emotional breaking point he had never anticipated. On one particularly bitter evening, Henry found himself meticulously polishing the executive conference room. The massive mahogany table reflected the faint glow of the city's lights, mirroring Henry's own weary reflection. He paused, leaning against his mop, feeling a sudden exhaustion that went far deeper than physical tiredness. He longed for simpler days. Days when respect flowed through these halls like lifeblood. Suddenly, the door swung open, shattering his quiet moment. Franklin Monroe stepped in with an air of impatience, trailed by Isabella Grant and a handful of younger staff members, clearly concluding a late-night strategy meeting. Franklin's eyes narrowed upon seeing Henry, irritation flashing openly across his face. Henry stiffened slightly, instantly bracing himself for the inevitable unpleasant exchange. "Still here?" Franklin scoffed, his voice dripping with disdain. He turned to Isabella and remarked loudly, intentionally audible, "You'd think someone of his age would understand efficiency. Apparently, even basic tasks are beyond him." Henry felt his cheeks flush with shame. He had experienced humiliation here before, but tonight, the contempt felt rawer, deeper somehow. Perhaps it was the presence of younger staff members who averted their eyes awkwardly, silently condoning Franklin's behavior through their silence. Or perhaps it was the icy detachment in Isabella's expression, her eyes coldly appraising him as if he weren't even human. Franklin stepped deliberately toward Henry, his gaze locked firmly, challenging. Without a hint of hesitation, he lifted a glass of water from the table and calmly poured its contents directly onto the polished wood Henry had just meticulously cleaned. Water cascaded onto the gleaming surface, pooling before dripping onto Henry's shoes. Franklin didn't blink, didn't apologize. Instead, he tilted his head mockingly. "Oops," he said softly, his lips twisted in a cruel smirk. "Looks like you'll have to start all over again, Mr. Brown. Perhaps this time you'll pay closer attention." The room remained silent, suffocatingly still. Isabella watched impassively, her indifference almost as hurtful as Franklin's deliberate cruelty. The younger staff members shifted uncomfortably, yet none intervened. Henry stood frozen, the cold sensation of water seeping through his shoes a chilling reminder of his helplessness. In that silent humiliation, 1,000 emotions surged within him. Anger, betrayal, sadness, and a heartbreaking sense of defeat. He had built this room, chosen this very table, believing it symbolized unity, respect, and integrity. To witness it become a stage for such callous cruelty felt unbearably painful. Yet Henry held his tongue, silently enduring this newest act of degradation, knowing the revelation of his true identity could not be rushed. Franklin eventually tired of his sport, and satisfied with his show of dominance, left the room without another word, Isabella and the staff following closely behind. The door closed softly behind them, leaving Henry painfully alone, surrounded only by echoes of humiliation. He stood rooted, staring down at the gleaming yet now desecrated table, the silence amplifying the ache in his chest. For the first time in years, tears pricked at the corners of his eyes. Henry lowered himself slowly into a nearby chair, burying his head in his hands, allowing himself a rare, vulnerable moment of grief. The sting of humiliation was not simply about pride. It was about witnessing the utter collapse of dignity within the very institution he'd founded on principles of mutual respect. This wasn't just an attack on him. It was an assault on every employee, every individual who'd placed their trust and dreams in Carter Enterprises. In the quiet solitude of the conference room, Henry grappled with a deeper pain. Jonathan. He wondered how his son could possibly remain unaware of this pervasive cruelty. Did Jonathan truly know nothing about the culture his executives had created? Or worse, was he silently complicit, choosing not to confront it? The thought pierced Henry's heart like a blade, forcing him to confront the agonizing possibility that his own flesh and blood might have lost sight of the very values he'd so diligently instilled. Minutes ticked by painfully slow as Henry contemplated his next steps. His initial goal, to quietly document injustices and reveal them at the right moment, now felt impossibly daunting. Could he endure more humiliations, or had this incident finally broken his resolve? The path forward felt overwhelming, uncertain, lined with painful confrontations and difficult truths yet to be uncovered. Yet as Henry sat there, something began to shift within him, a stubborn resilience born from decades of perseverance. He reminded himself that Carter Enterprises was more than brick and glass, more than impressive profits and high-tech achievements. It was a promise he'd made, to employees, to stakeholders, to himself, to uphold dignity and fairness above all else. Allowing cruelty to triumph would betray every principle he'd ever stood for. Slowly, Henry rose again, standing tall, despite the emotional and physical exhaustion. He picked up the mop once more, this time not with resignation, but with quiet defiance. The humiliation he'd just experienced was unbearable. Yes. But it had clarified his mission. He would not retreat or abandon his purpose. He owed it to the hundreds who relied upon Carter Enterprises for their livelihoods and dignity. More importantly, he owed it to Jonathan, to confront him directly, to challenge him to see the painful reality clearly. Henry meticulously cleaned the spilled water, each stroke reaffirming his determination. This night marked a turning point, not of surrender, but of deeper commitment. As he finally left the conference room, he felt a resolute clarity he'd not felt in days. Henry Carter would confront the injustices head-on, armed with irrefutable evidence and an unwavering commitment to reclaim the soul of his beloved enterprise. Outside, Manhattan's lights continued their indifferent shimmer, unaware of the quiet resolve that now burned fiercely within Henry. The cruel humiliation intended to break him had instead ignited a powerful, unstoppable determination. Tonight had been painful, deeply so, but in that pain, Henry Carter rediscovered the strength and purpose that had once made him a legend. He was ready now, more than ever, to fight for justice, dignity, and truth, prepared to face whatever awaited him in the days ahead. The cool Brooklyn air felt crisp against Henry Carter's face, as he stood silently outside his son Jonathan's modest, yet elegantly appointed townhouse. The familiar brick facade, softly illuminated by a warm porch light, seemed both comforting and strangely foreign. He hesitated momentarily, heart heavy, knowing that beyond this door awaited perhaps the most painful confrontation of his life. A confrontation he never imagined having with his own child. He knocked gently, each tap echoing with the weight of his anxiety. Within moments, Jonathan opened the door, his surprise quickly replaced by a warm, relieved smile. "Dad," Jonathan began warmly, embracing his father without reservation. Henry clung to the embrace longer than usual, drawing strength from his son's familiar warmth. It was a moment of precious normalcy, a fleeting comfort before he had to shatter the carefully constructed peace between them. Jonathan's keen eyes quickly noticed something different in his father's expression. "Come in," he urged gently, guiding Henry toward the cozy living room. As Henry entered, he felt a nostalgic pang. This room, filled with photos of their happiest moments, seemed untouched by the harsh truths he now carried. Settling into the plush leather chair opposite Jonathan, Henry struggled momentarily to find the right words. Jonathan studied his father's face closely, a crease of concern forming between his brows. "Dad, what's going on? You look exhausted," Jonathan said softly, his voice tender yet tinged with growing apprehension. Henry took a deep breath, steeling himself against the flood of emotion threatening to overwhelm him. "Jonathan, there's something important, something deeply troubling. I need to discuss with you," he began slowly, his voice steady yet heavy with emotion. Jonathan's expression shifted instantly from curiosity to cautious alarm. "What is it?" Jonathan pressed gently, leaning forward, sensing the gravity in his father's tone. Carefully, painfully, Henry recounted his recent days at Carter Enterprises under the persona of Joseph Brown. Jonathan listened intently, his initial confusion giving way to disbelief and then gradually, reluctantly, to shock. As Henry described the deliberate cruelties inflicted by Franklin Monroe and Isabella Grant, the humiliation he endured night after night, Jonathan's face paled, horror gradually clouding his eyes. At first, Jonathan shook his head, his voice trembling slightly. "Dad, are you absolutely certain? Franklin, Isabella, they've always seemed so capable, professional." Henry quietly handed over a carefully compiled folder of documentation, photos, and recordings meticulously collected during his undercover ordeal. Jonathan took it with unsteady hands, flipping through the pages, his eyes scanning quickly. Disbelief melting into painful recognition as the truth became undeniable. A silence fell between them, thick with sadness, disappointment, and confusion. Henry watched his son struggle internally, saw clearly the turmoil and heartache mirrored in Jonathan's eyes. His heart broke again. Not for himself this time, but for Jonathan, the idealistic young leader whose trust had just been violently shattered. Jonathan finally set the folder down, his hands shaking slightly. "How did I miss this, Dad?" he whispered, anguish clear in every word. "How could this happen under my watch? These are people I trusted, people I relied upon daily." Henry leaned forward, gently placing a reassuring hand on Jonathan's shoulder. "Son, the fault isn't solely yours," he murmured softly, compassionately. "But now you know the truth. It's not your mistakes that define you. It's how you respond once you realize what's happened." Jonathan lifted his eyes, meeting his father's gaze squarely, searching for guidance, for strength. Henry saw in his son's expression the painful, courageous journey he had experienced himself many years before, facing uncomfortable truths head-on accepting responsibility, and daring to fight for justice. Slowly, Jonathan straightened, his expression shifting from devastation toward resolve. "We have to confront them, Dad. This must be made right," Jonathan stated firmly, a spark of determination returning to his eyes. Henry nodded, pride swelling quietly within him. This was the son he'd raised, principled, courageous, and willing to stand firmly against injustice. "Yes," Henry agreed softly, his voice stronger now. "And it must be done immediately. We owe this to every employee who relies on us." Together, they carefully planned their approach, strategizing the most effective method to expose the truth publicly and decisively. Henry emphasized the need for a measured yet powerful revelation, one that would leave no room for doubt or denial. Jonathan listened attentively, absorbing his father's wisdom and experience, determined to make amends swiftly and honorably. Hours passed unnoticed, father and son united by purpose, their conversation intense yet deeply meaningful. By the end of their discussion, Jonathan had scheduled an emergency board meeting, ensuring all key stakeholders would be present. Henry agreed to appear once more as Joseph Brown, knowing the dramatic reveal of his true identity would underscore the seriousness and urgency of their message. As dawn approached, a quiet, contemplative calm settled between them. Jonathan reached out, gripping his father's hand firmly, his eyes reflecting newfound clarity and strength. "Thank you, Dad," he whispered sincerely. "Thank you for your courage, for facing humiliation to expose this truth. You've taught me more tonight than in all my years leading Carter Enterprises." Henry squeezed his son's hand gently, deeply moved by Jonathan's sincerity. "Leadership isn't just about being in charge," Henry replied softly, his voice gentle but firm. "It's about protecting those who trust you, even when doing so is painful or difficult." Jonathan nodded solemnly, understanding etched clearly across his face. As Henry rose to leave, father and son exchanged one final meaningful glance, a shared commitment to restore the heart and soul of their beloved company. Stepping back into the cool morning air, Henry felt a profound sense of relief, tempered by the awareness of challenges yet to come. He had feared confronting Jonathan, had feared the pain of seeing disappointment or denial in his son's eyes. But instead, he found strength, clarity, and unity. They would face the upcoming confrontation together, stronger because of the painful truths now openly shared between them. As Henry walked slowly toward his car, he felt an unexpected sense of hope bloom within him. The darkest moment had passed. The truth had been revealed. Now, united in purpose, father and son stood ready to reclaim the soul of Carter Enterprises, prepared to face whatever difficulties lay ahead. He glanced back once more at Jonathan's home, illuminated softly by the rising sun, and smiled faintly. This painful night had not shattered them. Instead, it had reforged their bond, deepened their trust, and ignited an unshakable resolve. Together they would fight, not simply to save their company, but to protect and honor the dignity of every individual who depended on them. With that conviction burning fiercely within him, Henry Carter knew, without doubt, that they would emerge from this trial stronger, wiser, and more deeply committed to the principles that had always defined their shared legacy. The boardroom atop Carter Enterprises' prestigious Manhattan headquarters was enveloped in a tense, expectant silence as the executives assembled for the emergency meeting called by Jonathan Carter. Sunlight streamed softly through expansive windows, illuminating faces etched with confusion and curiosity. At the head of the long, polished table, Jonathan stood composed, his demeanor quietly resolute. Beside him sat an older man, unassuming yet dignified, dressed plainly in the uniform of a janitor. Joseph Brown, known to them as an ordinary cleaner, but known secretly to Jonathan as Henry Carter, his father and the company's revered founder. Jonathan scanned the room slowly, his eyes settling briefly on Franklin Monroe and Isabella Grant, who exchanged wary glances, their discomfort evident. Jonathan knew what he was about to reveal would forever alter the company's trajectory, potentially shaking its foundations. But it was a necessary reckoning, one born from pain, humility, and an unyielding commitment to justice. He took a deep breath, addressing the assembly firmly yet thoughtfully, his voice measured but carrying unmistakable authority. We're here today because our company faces a crisis. Not merely a crisis of management, but of conscience. Jonathan began solemnly, holding the room's rapt attention. It's a crisis of integrity, of values once cherished that have been quietly eroded beneath our watch. A restless murmur rippled briefly through the room, but Jonathan silenced it swiftly by raising his hand. Allow me to introduce someone whose courage has revealed an uncomfortable but essential truth, he continued, turning respectfully toward the older man beside him. Please, Joseph, step forward. Henry Carter rose slowly, each movement calm and deliberate. Eyes widened around the room, confusion deepening as Joseph Brown, the humble janitor, took center stage. He stood quietly, allowing the silence to gather weight before finally, gently, removing his simple disguise. Gasps echoed softly as recognition spread swiftly among those who knew him from before. Franklin Monroe's face drained of color. Isabella Grant's composed mask fractured, revealing deep shock. My name, Henry began gently, his voice resonant yet steady, is Henry Carter. His simple declaration sent shockwaves through the room. Executives shifted uncomfortably, their eyes filled with disbelief and awe. Franklin visibly recoiled, eyes darting desperately toward the exit, as though he might escape the painful confrontation he now knew was inevitable. I returned to Carter Enterprises, Henry continued softly, his voice strong with restrained emotion. Disguised as Joseph Brown, a janitor, because I needed to witness firsthand the reality of this company. Our company, beyond the polished image presented to the public. Henry paused, his gaze sweeping the room with gentle authority. What I discovered profoundly disturbed me, he went on, his voice quivering slightly with emotion. I saw cruelty, disrespect, and systematic mistreatment of employees who trusted us. I myself endured humiliations, deliberately inflicted, simply because I appeared powerless. His eyes rested firmly on Franklin and Isabella, the weight of his gaze heavy with unspoken accusation. This treatment was not an isolated incident, but reflective of a deeper cultural decay, a betrayal of everything Carter Enterprises once stood for. Franklin began stammering an attempted defense, but Jonathan silenced him firmly. Please remain silent, Franklin. There will be time for your explanations later. Jonathan's voice was calm, unwavering in authority. Henry continued, each word deliberate, resonant with sincerity and quiet determination. When I founded Carter Enterprises, my vision extended beyond profits. I wanted this company to embody integrity, compassion, and dignity. I believed deeply, and still believe, that how we treat our lowest-ranking employees defines our true character. The room remained utterly silent, held captive by Henry's heartfelt conviction. Jonathan stepped forward, voice resolute. Because of my father's courage and self-sacrifice, we have an opportunity today, painful yet necessary, to reaffirm our core values. Effective immediately, Franklin Monroe and Isabella Grant, along with those who enabled or condoned their behavior, will be relieved of their positions. We will conduct thorough investigations to ensure justice and transparency for every affected individual. Franklin's face twisted with desperate protest. Isabella stared at the table, utterly defeated. Security personnel entered quietly, escorting them out amid stunned silence. Jonathan watched solemnly, no satisfaction in his gaze, only deep sadness at the necessity of this action. Turning back to those who remained, Jonathan's expression softened. This marks the beginning of a significant cultural transformation at Carter Enterprises. Today, we recommit ourselves, not just symbolically, but in concrete action, to dignity, empathy, and fairness. This commitment starts now, with a new initiative. Jonathan revealed thoughtfully, today, we launch the Carter Empathy Initiative, a comprehensive cultural program that prioritizes dignity and respect for every employee, from executive offices to entry-level positions. We will establish new channels for communication, accountability, and transparency, ensuring no voice is ever silenced or ignored again. Henry's gaze met his son's, pride shining unmistakably through his solemnity. Jonathan continued warmly. My father has reminded me, and all of us, that true leadership isn't just about power, status, or success. It's about humility, integrity, and an unwavering commitment to protect and uplift those who depend on us. The executives around the table nodded quietly, moved deeply by Jonathan's sincerity. Many looked humbled, reflective, recognizing their own passive complicity in allowing such injustices to persist. From this moment forward, Jonathan stated decisively, Carter Enterprises will rebuild its culture from the ground up. We will reclaim the dignity, compassion, and humanity that defined us at our foundation. It won't be easy, and it won't happen overnight. But it will happen, and it begins today. A gentle applause, hesitant at first, built into a heartfelt, unified affirmation. Henry felt a profound sense of relief mingled with quiet triumph. Justice had prevailed. Painful truths had been courageously confronted. And the company he loved dearly stood poised for meaningful rebirth. As the meeting concluded, Jonathan embraced his father warmly, their bond strengthened profoundly by the trials endured. "Thank you, Dad," Jonathan whispered sincerely, eyes moist with gratitude. "You've reminded me what truly matters. I promise you, this company will once again reflect everything you built it to be." Henry smiled warmly, heart swelling with pride and love. "I never doubted you, Jonathan," he murmured softly. "Our mistakes don't define us. How we respond to them does." Together, father and son stood quietly before the expansive windows overlooking Manhattan, sunlight streaming warmly upon their faces, a quiet symbol of renewal. Henry knew their journey was far from over, that challenges remained ahead. But he also knew, profoundly, that Carter Enterprises would emerge stronger, guided now by deeper compassion, humility, and integrity. It was not merely a restoration of justice, it was a redemption of hope, a reaffirmation of values once lost, and now powerfully reclaimed. Carter Enterprises would rise again, not simply as a powerful corporation, but as a shining example of empathy, humanity, and dignity restored. The journey of Henry Carter serves as an extraordinary testament to the enduring power of integrity, courage, and compassion. At first glance, Carter Enterprises was a shining beacon of corporate success, an iconic symbol of the American dream in bustling Manhattan. Yet, beneath the surface lay hidden truths that threatened the very foundation of its legacy. Driven by whispers of injustice within the walls of his beloved company, Henry chose humility over comfort, disguising himself as Joseph Brown, an unassuming janitor, to uncover the unsettling realities firsthand. This decision led him through painful nights of humiliation, where the values he spent decades building seemed hopelessly lost. His heart endured unimaginable trials, as those he trusted displayed shocking arrogance, cruelty, and disdain. However, through this courageous undertaking, Henry illuminated a powerful truth, not only about leadership, but about the human spirit itself. True leadership demands humility, empathy, and the unwavering courage to confront injustice, regardless of personal cost. His emotional and challenging confrontation with his son, Jonathan Carter, symbolized more than a family reconciliation. It represented the renewal of commitment to principles long overlooked. Together, father and son confronted the painful truths head-on, dismantling the toxic culture fostered by Franklin Monroe and Isabella Grant, restoring dignity and respect within their company. This story provides a profound lesson for each of us. In our pursuit of success, ambition can sometimes blind us to the fundamental importance of human dignity and fairness. It reminds us that organizations, no matter how successful, must remain anchored in integrity and empathy if they wish to thrive sustainably. Henry's experience encourages us to remain vigilant, courageous, and willing to speak up for what is right, even when silence would be easier. It teaches us that our true character is defined not by our moments of comfort, but by how we respond when confronted with adversity, injustice, and truth. In today's world, applying this lesson means actively choosing empathy in our interactions, courageously addressing injustice when we see it, and continuously nurturing environments where respect and integrity flourish. Whether you're a leader of a large corporation, a small business owner, or simply navigating daily relationships, Henry Carter's powerful example invites us all to become guardians of fairness, humility, and compassion in our lives. If this inspiring journey touched your heart and resonated with your values, we warmly invite you to subscribe to our channel. Your subscription is not just a simple click, it's an affirmation of your commitment to growth, integrity, and empathy. By subscribing, you empower us to continue bringing you powerful stories that uplift, inspire, and motivate positive change. Together, let's keep discovering profound lessons that guide us toward a better, fairer, and more compassionate world. Thank you for your support, and we can't wait to share more life-changing stories with you soon.